Welcome back to another edition of a weekly update. And you notice today I have a friend that joined me. So this is Sarah Nilsson. Sarah, welcome.
Thank you.
Sarah has a background in UAS, and not only in UAS, but in also manned aircraft. She's a flight instructor instrument, multi-engine instructor. Tell us more about your background, Sarah.
Well, actually, I don't actively flight instruct anymore.
But you do have certificates.
I have all my CFI, IMEI ratings and all that good stuff. But what I really do now is I practice law and I teach at Embry-Riddle.
Absolutely.
So I combined my love of flying with my love of law, and I made a career out of it.
And you specialize in drone law, right?
Yes.
UAS?
Yes, UAS law.
And so Sarah has her own practice. So if any of you guys have questions about UAS and law in general, she's the perfect person for this. She's on top of all the regulation and everything. She has a website. I'll put it in the description as well. You can see all the information on her website. A great source of information. If you ever have any questions about anything law related, that's the place to find information. So the reason I brought Sarah on board is we have some law related topics this week, and then in the future as well, I'd like to do more segments with Sarah. We have something that we're working on right now with the tort law, which is something that you may have seen in the news in the last 2 years. I think this has been going on
Yes,
for a while.
well, actually since 2017, yes.
2017. So there's been some updates, actually positive updates, but I don't think everyone is familiar with what's going on. So actually we're going to record a separate segment completely talking about tort law and the ULC. And if you've heard these keywords in the past, then you'll get a lot of really good information from that video. So this week in the news, there's actually been a lot of stuff going on. And even yesterday, there was some more information posted. So we're going to talk about three main things. I try each week to do only 3 topics. If there is more that's interested, then we'll do that. But the first one is talking about RemoteID. We'll get to that in a minute. And then talking about the FAA waivers that were issued to this company to fly over people. And that's kind of a big deal. I know it's happened before, but we'll talk about the details. And then the last one is the Amazon drone delivery that's kind of taking shape with the release of a new drone design, and we'll talk about that in a minute. So let's get to the first one, which was the delay in implementing RemoteID, and that came from the FAA. This week there's a convention in Baltimore, I think it is, from the FAA, and the idea is RemoteID is the system that is supposed to be released to help drones be identified in the airspace. So that's kind of the bottom line. And the FAA has initially said that this would be released in July of 2019. They're actually now pushing it down the road for September of 2019. Hopefully not delayed again. But the big key with this is that we need to have RemoteID primarily because if we're going to do any kind of advanced operation, so if we're going to be flying over people, flying beyond line of sight, and then night operation currently needs a waiver. And I think that's something that you've done, right, with your clients, the waivers?
Yes. And talking of waivers, we're going to probably see the night waiver disappear and the operations over people. We have 2 NPRMs that are out regarding those. Yep.
And so there's more information in a video that I've made recently about RemoteID. So I'll put a link as well in the description. You can see the difference between RemoteID and ADSB. Those are 2 technologies that are being discussed a lot. So I made actually it's a 21-minute video that talks about everything about RemoteID. And as it is right now, RemoteID is still somewhat of a concept for most of the people that are going to provide it or want to provide it. So there's more information to come, but become familiar with RemoteID. This is something that we're going to see out there pretty much for sure. The question is, when is it going to happen? So some of the discussion items that I want to have for you guys in here is, where do you think the holdup is actually in terms of the approval?
I think right now what we're seeing is we have a draft out that's been out a while. It's called an advance notice of proposed rulemaking. And what that is the FAA is trying to get industry involvement so that they can come up with rules that will work for industry. So usually you'll see the ANPRM before the NPRM. And then once the NPRM comes out, that's where we'll get a lot of comments from industry, and those will be taken into account when the final rule gets drafted, much like when 107 came into fruition. And that was a very large one that took a couple of years worth of comments. So we'll hopefully see something similar.
And anybody can comment on an NPRM?
Absolutely.
Right?
The public can go to the Federal Register, which is a government website that lists the NPRM. and then the comments can be made. And all the comments have to be taken into account when the drafters of the final rule put it back on there before it goes into effect, 90 days before it goes into effect. And what it is at the beginning of the rule, when the final rule is issued, there is what we call a preamble. And the preamble contains all the answers the FAA has to the comments, whether they adopted them, didn't adopt them, why, and all the goodies. So usually the preamble is a few hundred pages, much, much larger than the rule itself. But that's where all the good thought process is that you want to look at.
And this is important for you if you're new to the drone industry. The drone industry is in its infancy, I would say. It's only a couple of years old, really. The FAA is trying to catching up on a lot of things, and there's going to be a lot of these NPRM for a lot of operations. So get familiar with this process and understand how it works. You have a role to play as well, and if you want to leave a comment, you should go on the website, like you said, and submit that comment to let your voice be heard and what you think should be put in place. So that's kind of an important process.
Yes, and the comment period usually is a certain number of days, 60 days. It's been as short as 11 days when the FAA put up the registration rule for all UAS. And that was very short. But the comment period, keep an eye on it, because after the comment period closes, you can't comment anymore.
That's it. This is it.
So that's your chance.
Okay, let's move on to the next piece of big news. And this is kind of a big deal in a sense, is that the FAA has issued a waiver to fly a P4P, a Phantom Pro, over people using a parachute system. And the parachute comes from Pair Zero, which is a company, I think it's an Israeli company actually, that makes it. And this is not a new thing, right? There's been approval for waiver in the past for people to fly over, drones to fly over people. Now, the big deal in here is that the FAA actually has followed a process that can be replicated and used again if you use the same kind of combo, the same kind of drone, and the same kind of parachute. And the idea is you have to meet a standard. And there's this company, I don't know if it's even a company, it's more like an organization, I guess, ASTM.
It is.
Yeah,
an organization.
ASTM is this company that creates standards for everything. I was on their website. I think they said they have like 120,000 standards across the world. And they came up with this standard for a parachute for a drone. And the FAA recognizes that this standard is something that they're okay with, and they approved the waiver based on the fact that this parachute meets the standard. And so that's kind of the big change right here with the FAA. Instead of approving just one waiver for one specific company, they approved a waiver based on the fact that it meets a standard. And this is something that is good. I think it's a good step forward for the FAA. This basically means that other people can apply without having to create a brand new process. They basically just have to prove that they can meet the standard under ASTM. So I think that's a big plus.
It is a plus. Plus, if you look at the NPRM for the operations over people, that's the draft that's out there, you'll see that the FAA is already recognizing that certain UAS are of a certain size and velocity and I guess kinetic energy, because that's what we're looking at for in case they run into a crowd. So they're already categorizing based on that what is allowed in the upcoming reg and what won't be. So they're getting there.
Yeah, that's really cool. And I guess, what do you think is the impact going to be of this kind of rule for seeing more drones flying over people?
Well, if you looked at the FAA Reauthorization Act of last year that came out in October, you'll see that Congress has asked the FAA to start thinking seriously about allowing the delivery of property for compensation or hire by a drone, which is a first and probably spurred by Amazon, of course. Mm-hmm. So we're going to be seeing that coming down the pipe pretty soon, because Congress has actually given the FAA a year to do that. I doubt it'll be a year. I think it'll be a little bit longer, but at least it's a step in the right direction.
Yeah,
and flying over people is necessary if you're going to do the other regs.
Yep. And there's two more sets of operation that are considered more advanced. We've got beyond line of sight, which is also required for delivery.
Absolutely.
And I think this will open the door for probably a standard for beyond line of sight somewhere. And then night operation, which I think is not necessarily as advanced, but it's still considered an advanced operation. So, but again, for delivery, I think that's going to be kind of the key. So
absolutely.
Lots of really exciting stuff in the news for US this week, especially related to all these advanced operation. Speaking of advanced operation, Amazon's got a new drone design that they put out. So I'll put a little video in the background as we talk here to show you what it looks like. But they have their conference in Vegas right now called Remars 2019, and they unveiled a new design for an airplane, which is really cool looking. It's a VTOL, which is the vertical takeoff and landing aircraft. And it's got wings that actually kind of go around the propellers of the VTOL, which makes it kind of a safer design, which is really cool. This thing is designed to be flying 15 miles and deliver packages that are under 5 pounds in less than 30 minutes. So this is what Amazon is trying to do with their delivery, quick delivery of small packages. And then what they've said is they're going to be ready to operate within months, which
Yes,
is
that is exciting. And talking of the wings around the propellers, that's part of the draft NPRM for the operations over people. All of those categories that the FAA is looking at have to have propellers that are shielded.
Yeah, and that is key
Yeah.
to make sure that it's safe if anything happens on the ground. Now the FAA has said that, and this is a quote, it said that they've allowed Amazon to operate their unmanned aircraft for research and development and crew training in an authorized flight area. Now, as you see on the video is in the middle of nowhere. They have big open fields, which is good for practicing and getting this authorized. It'll be interesting to see how that happens over populated areas, and
Yes.
which is expected where they're going to be doing deliveries.
Yes.
Do you know where they're going to be starting to do delivery
no
first?
idea.
Yeah, I don't think
they
anybody.
keep that very quiet right now.
I'm sure. There are other roadblocks that I can think of. Obviously, flying over people is one of them, but they're meeting the requirements and then a bit beyond line of sight. One of the questions that I had for myself was, how are we going to do separation between autonomous drones and drones that are going to be controlled by you and I that are just flying in the
Yes.
airspace?
Well, I know NASA and the FAA have been working on for many, many years, since at least 2015, unmanned traffic management, which is essentially an air traffic control for the lower altitudes, 400 and below. I'm pretty sure that they are working hand in hand with Amazon in the testing and research and development of this. The RemoteID will factor into this, I'm pretty sure. And not only that, but more than likely, there's going to be huge integration between this and manned air traffic control. And that is a whole nother set of rules, especially because we, especially here in Arizona, have a ton of small airfields for manned aviation. Just in the Phoenix metropolitan area alone, there are 25 airports. You wouldn't even expect other than Sky Harbor, but there are. So that's going to be very interesting to see how that's done.
I noticed that their drone has an N number on it.
Yes.
In the video.
Yes.
Yeah, so it's kind of registered under different kind of regulation at this
Yes.
point, probably as a experimental, I would guess. And then another question that I had, which I think is a good topic for discussion, is how they're going to prevent people from stealing these drones or shooting them down. Which we know shooting down a drone is
It's a federal
offense.
crime,
Yeah.
18 U.S. Code 32. That actually makes it a federal crime. Although the U.S. Attorney has never, ever, to this day, prosecuted anyone for that. But the regs are on the books.
Yeah, and I'm sure Amazon will be pushing for that if
Oh,
anything
yes,
happens.
absolutely.
Yeah, so it'll be interesting to see people trying to steal these drones.
Well, as far as the stealing goes, once the package is on the ground, I do believe a couple of students of mine who are working at Amazon are working on a kind of a new type of technology to kind of make it stealing proof. So that's all hush hush though. All I hear is rumors that they've been working on that for quite a while.
I'm sure
2
they've
years.
thought about that.
Yeah.
I'm
Oh,
sure
yeah.
they've thought about
Yes.
that. That's if you want more information, these are the sources that I use. I put the link at the bottom of the video so you can click on these articles and go find more information. And this is all we have for you today. If you have any comments, questions, rude remarks, leave them in the comment section. And then we'll see you again next week for another episode. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you for having me.